There's a thing people out here believe without ever saying it out loud. They believe that some men are built for certain things and ruined for others. That a man with hands the size of dinner plates, a man who can bend a horseshoe cold and drop a steer with a look, that kind of man is meant for hard work and long silences, and nothing softer than that. They believed it about Cullen Rourke. For 19 years the whole valley believed it. The women crossed the street when his shadow fell long across the boards. The men respected him the way you respect weather from a distance, with your hat held tight. Children were told his name the way you're told about the river in flood season. Stay away from the big man. He's not for you. And Cullen never argued. That was the strange part. A man that size, and he never once raised his voice to correct what they thought of him. He just carried it, the way he carried everything. Quiet, bent a little at the shoulders, like the whole town was a sack of feed he'd agreed to haul and never set down. Everyone said the giant cowboy would never be a father. Everyone said he didn't have it in him, that whatever softness a man needs for that, it had been beaten out of him young, or maybe never there at all. And then on the worst night of the worst month I can remember, fate walked up his porch steps in the dark, small, shivering, barefoot in the mud. And she knocked. Stay with me, because what happened after that door opened, I wrote it all down, every part of it, the way an old man writes down the things he's afraid he'll forget. And I'm telling you now, before we start, I have been wrong about a great many things in my life. I was never more wrong than I was about Cullen Rourke. The night she came, I was counting nails. That's a habit of mine, and I'll own it. When my hands get to shaking, which they do now more than they used to, being 61 and full of miles, I count things to make them stop. Nails in the coffee tin, coins in the drawer. The years since my Martha passed, which is 11, and I count those too, though counting them has never once made them shorter. I keep a ledger, little brown book, cracked spine, been with me since I hired on at the Rourke place. Everything goes in it. Head of cattle, cost of wire, days it rained. And other things too, things a ledger's got no business holding, because a man alone needs somewhere to put what happens to him, and I never was one for talking. So that's where I was. My cabin, the small one out past the corral, tin of nails in my lap and the lamp turned low, when the storm came down off the ridge like it had a grudge. I heard the dog first. Rue, Cullen's old blue heeler, set to barking up at the main house, not the lazy bark she gives a coyote, but the sharp one, the someone's here one. Then I heard nothing for a long stretch, just the rain hammering the roof and the wind trying the shutters. And then I heard Cullen's door. You'd not think a man could recognize the sound of a door from 100 yards through a storm, but I'd know that one anywhere. It's a big heavy oak thing he hung himself, and it groans on the hinge like an old cow lying down. It groaned now, and it stayed open. That was the part that got me up off my chair. It stayed open, and in this weather no man leaves his door open unless something stopped him cold. I pulled my slicker on and went out into it. The mud grabbed at my boots the whole way up. By the time I made the porch I was soaked through to the shirt, and I came around the post ready to holler, and then I didn't holler at all, because I saw them. Cullen was on one knee. Understand what I'm telling you. Cullen Rourke is 6'6" and change, and near 280 pounds, and I have watched that man work a full day in August heat without once sitting down. I have never in 9 years seen him kneel to anything, not to fix a boot, not to pray, not to look a smaller man in the eye. He does not kneel, it's not in him. He was on one knee in his own doorway, in the light of his own lamp, and in front of him, so small she came barely to his shoulder, even with him down like that, stood a girl. She couldn't have been more than 7. Apache, I knew that right off, from the cut of her dress and the dark fall of her hair, though the dress was near torn to rags, and the hair was plastered flat with rain. Her feet were bare and gone gray-white with cold. She had her arms wrapped around herself, and she was shaking so hard I could see it from where I stood, a full-body shudder that wouldn't quit. But she wasn't crying. That's the thing I put in the ledger later, underlined twice. She was not crying. She stood there in front of the biggest man in the valley, half frozen and lost in God knows how far from home, and she looked up at him with a face that had decided, somewhere along the way, that crying was a thing it could no longer afford. I know that face, I've worn it. Cullen wasn't saying anything. He had both his big hands held out low and open, palms up, the way you'd hold them for a spooked horse, and he was just waiting, being still, letting her look at him and decide. The rain roared, Rue whined and paced, and nobody moved. Then Cullen turned his head slow and saw me on the steps, and something passed over his face that I'd never seen there before. It wasn't fear. Cullen doesn't have much use for fear. It was something more like a man who's been handed a thing so fragile he's afraid his own hands will be the death of it. "Eli," he said, "just my name." Rough, low, barely over the storm, but there was a whole plea in it. "I'm here," I said. "I'm here, Cullen, easy." I came up onto the porch careful, keeping wide of the girl so she'd not feel boxed. Up close she looked worse. There was a scrape along her jaw gone dark, and her lips had a blue cast to them, and one of her wrists, she was holding it funny, close against her belly, favoring it. "Where'd she come from?" I said, quiet. "Knocked," Cullen said, like that answered it. Then, seeing it didn't, Rue went off. I opened up and she was just here, Eli, on the step. Like this. "Anybody with her?" "No," he said it flat, but I saw his jaw work. "Looked, nobody. She come across that whole flat alone in this." I did the arithmetic in my head the way I do. Nearest Apache camp was up past the North Creek, better than 9 miles, over ground I wouldn't want to cross in daylight dry. This child had crossed it in the dark, in a storm, barefoot, hurt. 9 miles. I have known grown men who wouldn't have made it. "She's froze half to death," I said. "We got to get her inside, Cullen, warm her up before we do anything else." But Cullen didn't move, and I understood why he didn't, and it near broke something in me to understand it. He was afraid to touch her. This enormous man, who could have lifted her with 2 fingers, was afraid that if he reached for her she'd bolt back out into the dark and be lost for good. And he was maybe more afraid of something else, of the fact that a scared child, seeing him come at her, 10 times her size, would have every reason in the world to run. He'd spent 19 years being the thing people warned their children about. And now here was a child, and the warning was written all over her body, in the way she flinched when the lamp guttered. So he stayed down on that knee and made himself small as he was able, and he did the only thing he could think to do. He talked to her. I'd never heard Cullen say more than 10 words in a stretch. But he knelt there in the doorway, and he started talking to that little girl in a voice I didn't know he had, low and slow, and even, the voice he uses on green horses, the voice that means nothing here is going to hurt you. "It's a cold one," he said. "Coldest we had all year, I reckon. You come a long way in it, that's a brave thing, braver than most." He kept his hands open. "I got a fire in there, got it going good. And Eli here, he's going to make something hot, aren't you, Eli?" "I am," I said. "Coffee, broth, whatever she'll take." "Whatever she'll take," Cullen echoed. "Nobody's going to make you do a thing you don't want. You hear? You can stand right there on that step long as you need, but it's warm inside, and you're cold. And I'd surely like it if you come in out of that rain." The girl looked at him, then at me, then back at him. And she took 1 step forward. I have watched a lot of hard men do a lot of hard things. I watched Cullen Rourke's face when that child took 1 step toward him, and I will tell you plain, I had to look away. Some things aren't meant to be stared at. A man's heart cracking open after 19 years of being shut is one of them. We got her inside. It took near an hour, all told. She wouldn't let Cullen carry her, wouldn't let anybody carry her that first night, but she came in on her own 2 ruined feet and let me set her by the fire on the big chair, wrapped in every blanket in the house. I heated broth and she drank it in little sips, watching us both over the rim of the cup the whole time, the way a cat watches a room it doesn't trust. Cullen sat across from her on the floor, his back against the wall so's he'd not loom. He hardly took his eyes off her. When she shivered, he'd feed another split of pine into the fire without a word. When she finished the broth, he'd look at me and I'd fill the cup again. We had a whole conversation, him and me, without saying anything, the way you do with a man you've worked beside for years. Her wrist was hurt but not broke. I've set enough breaks to know the difference. Sprained bad, swelling up. I wrapped it. She let me, though she watched my hands the whole while like she was ready to pull back. She didn't speak, not that night. I tried her with the few Apache words I had, which weren't many and were likely mangled, and she gave no sign she understood, though something flickered when I got one close. Mostly she just watched, and warmed. And at some point I'd gone to the window to check the storm. I turned back around and found she'd fallen asleep in the chair, dead asleep, the way only the truly exhausted can sleep, chin down, one hand still curled around the empty cup. Cullen was watching her sleep. I came and stood by him, and for a long while neither of us said anything. The fire popped. The rain had eased to a steady patter. Rue had settled at the girl's feet, which told me something that dog doesn't take to strangers. "They're going to say she can't stay," I said finally, quiet so's not to wake her. "You know that, Cullen, come morning when word gets round. They're going to say a man like you's got no business with a child, especially not," I stopped. "Especially not an Apache one," Cullen finished. His voice was low and even. "Say it, Eli, I've heard worse. Said it to my face, some of them." "It's not what I think." "I know what you think." He was quiet a moment. "I know what they think too, been living inside what they think a long while now." I looked down at him, this mountain of a man sitting on his own floor. "Cullen, what do you aim to do?" He didn't answer right off. He watched the girl breathe, and when he spoke it wasn't really to me. "When I was a boy," he said, "I was already big. Bigger'n every kid, then bigger'n every man, and you'd think that make a body safe. It don't. It makes you a thing people are scared of before you've done a single thing to earn it." He turned one of his huge hands over, looked at the palm like it belonged to someone else. "By the time I was grown, I'd stopped fighting it. Easier to be what folks already decided you are. You get so you believe it yourself. That there's a wall around you. That certain things, gentle things, there for other men. Not you. You're the big one, the hard one. The one they cross the street from." He looked up at me then. "That girl walked 9 miles in the dark and the cold and the rain," he said, "past every warm window in this valley, past the church, past the doctors, past folks with soft hands and easy words." His jaw tightened. "And she come here to my door. To the one door everybody in this whole country would have told her to run from." The fire snapped. "Now you tell me, Eli," Cullen said, and his voice had gone rough as gravel. "What kind of man would I be if the one time in my whole life somebody chose me, I turned her out?" I didn't have an answer for that. I don't think there was one. Word got round by noon the next day, same as I said it would. This is how it always goes out here. Nobody sees a thing, and everybody knows everything. First it was the Halloran boy, come by for a fence rail his daddy had borrowed and never returned, who saw the girl through the window and lit out like his tail was afire. Then it was Reverend Pyle, who arrived on his gray mare with his mouth already open, and behind him within the hour half, the valley seemed to have found some errand that brought them past the Rourke gate. They didn't come in. Cullen didn't invite them. They just gathered out by the road in their little clumps, hats and bonnets, talking behind their hands, watching the house like it might do something. I'll not pretend it didn't get ugly. Some of what got said I won't put down here. There was talk of the law. There was talk of the girls' people and what they'd do and whose fault it'd be. There was one man, I'll not name him. He's dead now and it doesn't matter, who stood at that gate and said, loud enough to carry, that it was an unnatural thing. A man like Cullen and a child. And everyone knew what a man like Cullen was, and somebody ought to do something before something happened. Cullen heard it. He was on the porch. He heard every word. And here's the thing I want you to understand about that morning, because it's the thing that changed how I saw him for good. He didn't go down to that gate. The old Cullen would have. Not to fight, Cullen was never one to go looking. But the old Cullen would have gone down there and stood in front of that man and let his size do the arguing, let the fear do the work it always did, made them all step back and shut their mouths the way they always shut their mouths. That was the only tool he'd ever been given. Be the wall, be the weather, make them afraid. He didn't reach for it. Because the girl was inside, and the girl was watching, sitting in the window with Rue's head in her lap, watching this huge man she'd chosen, waiting to see what he was. And Cullen, I watched him figure this out in real time, standing on his own porch with that ugliness rolling up at him from the road. Cullen understood that if he went down there and became the wall, became the thing they feared, then he'd have proved them right. He'd have shown that child that the big man's answer to the world was the same as it had always been. Force, fear, the street cleared by his shadow. And he wanted to be something else for her. He wanted, maybe for the first time in his whole life, to be something other than what everyone had decided. So he did the hardest thing I ever saw a man do. He turned his back on that gate, on all of them, on 19 years of it. And he went inside, and he shut his big oak door, and he sat down on the floor by the window next to a little girl who wasn't his and didn't speak his tongue, and he said something to her too soft for me to hear. And she, for the first time since she'd come to us, she almost smiled. Almost. I stood out there in the yard between the shut door and the muttering road, an old man with a ledger in his coat and no idea in the world what came next. I could feel the whole thing balanced on a knife's edge, the valley on one side, Cullen on the other, and that child in the middle of it, worth more than she knew, having chosen the one man everyone swore could never be trusted with a thing so small and so precious. I took out my ledger right there in the mud. My hands were shaking. I didn't count anything. I just wrote down the date and under it one line, which is the only prayer I know how to say. Lord, let the big man be right about himself, just this once, let him be right. And then from up the north road, the road that came down out of the hills, the road she'd walked in the dark, I heard horses. More than one coming fast. I turned to look. So did the folks at the gate. I saw their heads come up all together. And through the last of the storm mist hanging low over the flat, I made out riders, Apache riders. 4, maybe 5 of them coming down hard toward the Rourke place with the mud flying up behind. Her people had found her. And I understood, cold in my chest, that everything the last day had been building toward, every hard and tender thing I'd watched Cullen Rourke become, was about to be decided in the next few minutes, out in that yard, by men with every right to their anger and no reason on this earth to trust the giant standing between them and the child. I heard the big oak door open behind me. And I heard Cullen's slow, heavy step come out onto the porch. The riders came into the yard, and everything went quiet. Not the quiet of peace, the other kind, the kind that settles over a place right before it decides which way it's going to break. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Even Rue, who'd been growling low in her chest, went still. There were 5 of them. They pulled up short of the porch, horses lathered and blowing steam into the cold morning, and I could see in the set of them that they'd ridden hard and slept little. Their faces were closed, careful, the face a man wears when he's walked into a thing he doesn't yet understand and has learned, the hard way over a lot of years, that not understanding a thing can get you killed. 4 were young, warriors tense in the saddle, hands not far from where hands go. The 5th was old. He sat a paint horse at the center of them, and he was old the way the mountains are old, weathered down to the essential thing, nothing wasted. His hair was iron gray and long. His eyes went across the whole yard in one slow sweep. The folks bunched at the gate gone suddenly silent, me standing in the mud with my mouth open, the shut windows of the house. And then the porch. And then Cullen. I watched the old man see Cullen, and I watched him do the thing everyone does, the thing that had ruled Cullen's whole life. I watched him take the measure of that size, that bulk, those hands. I saw the young ones shift their weight. 5 against 1, but the one was a giant standing above them on his own high porch, and everybody in that yard did the arithmetic at the same time and came up uneasy. Cullen didn't move. He stood at the top of his steps with his arms loose at his sides and his hat off. He'd taken his hat off, I noticed, some instinct of respect, and he waited. He didn't try to look bigger. That was the thing. A man like Cullen cornered, the whole world would expect him to draw himself up to fill the doorway to make the threat plain. He did the opposite. He rounded his shoulders down. He kept his hands where they could be seen. He made himself, as much as a mountain can, into something that wasn't a mountain. The old man spoke first. His English was slow, but it was clear, worn smooth by years of having to use it with men like the ones at the gate. "A child is missing," he said. "From our camp 2 nights now." His eyes never left Cullen's face. "A girl, 7 summers. We have followed her track down through the hills." He paused. "The track comes to this house. Behind me at the gate, I heard someone suck in a breath. I heard the word told you, hissed low. The valley had its story already, and here it was riding down out of the hills to prove itself. The big man and the vanished Apache child, and I could feel them all leaning forward to watch it come true." Cullen was quiet a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and even, and it carried across that silent yard like a hand laid flat on a table. "She's here," he said. "She's inside, warm, fed, she's safe." The young ones came up off their saddles an inch. One of them said something short and hard in Apache, and put his hand where his hand had been drifting. "And Cullen, I want you to see this." Cullen didn't flinch and didn't reach for anything, and didn't so much as glance at the rifle that stood just inside his own door not 4 feet away. He kept his empty hands open at his sides. "She's hurt," he went on steady, "her wrist, her feet. She walked a long way in the storm, but it's nothing that won't mend. My man here," he tipped his head at me, he wrapped it up. "She's been sleeping most the night." He swallowed. "She hasn't spoke, not one word, we don't know her name." The old man held up a hand, and the young one settled, though I could see it cost him. "You will bring her out," the old man said. It wasn't quite a question. And here is where it turned. Here is the part I've gone over 100 times in the years since, lying awake, and I still don't know that I'd have had the wisdom to do what Cullen did. Because the easy thing, the safe thing, was to go and fetch that girl and hand her over and be done. Prove he'd done no wrong. Empty his hands of the whole dangerous business and let these men take their child and ride back up into the hills and let the valley find something else to chew on. Any sensible man would have done exactly that. I'd have done it. I was halfway to saying so. Cullen shook his head. Slow, careful, but he shook it. The yard went cold. I heard leather creak as the young men tightened up. My heart came right up into my throat. "Cullen," I said low. "Cullen, don't." "I'll bring her out," Cullen said, talking over me, talking straight to the old man. "I will, in a minute, but not—" He stopped, wrestled with it. Words never came easy to him, and now he needed them to come right, and I could see the labor of it in his face. Not dragged out, not scared. She come to this door in the dark, half froze to death, and she was carrying more fear than a grown man ought to carry, and it took me the whole night to get her to look at me without shaking. His voice roughened. "I'm not going to undo that, not even to give her back to her own. She's the one that walks out that door, on her own feet, when she's ready, or I don't reckon she truly went anywhere she didn't choose." Nobody said anything. The old man's eyes had changed. I couldn't have told you how exactly. The man gave away about as much as a stone gives away, but something behind them had shifted, some recalculation running quiet underneath. You would keep a father from his child, the old man said, in the name of the child's comfort. And Cullen, God, this near killed me. Cullen's face just came apart at the word father, just for a second. Then he put it back together. You're her father, he said, quiet. Her father's brother, the old man said. Her father is dead last winter, the fever. A pause. Her mother also. She has been in my care since. Poorly, I think now. She has not, and here the old man's own careful voice caught just barely, just enough that I heard the man underneath it. She has not been happy since. I did not know how to reach her, a girl who does not speak. I am an old man, I did not know. And all at once I understood the whole shape of it. The child who walked 9 miles in a storm past every warm window in the valley. She hadn't been lost. Lost children don't walk that straight, that far, that's certain. She'd been running from a grief so big there wasn't a camp or a house or a person in the whole world that felt safe to hold it, running to the one place, the one door, that nobody would ever think to look, chosen for the very reason everybody else feared it. She hadn't stumbled onto Cullen's porch. She'd been looking for a wall to hide behind. And she'd found the biggest one in the country. Cullen must have come to the same understanding at the same moment, because he turned and looked at the house, at the window where I knew the girl was sitting, watching all of this, watching the men she'd run from come down out of the hills to fetch her back. And his face, when he turned to that window, was the face of a man who has just realized that the kindest thing he can do and the hardest thing he can do are the very same thing. I'll get her, he said soft, to the old man, to himself, to her. He went inside. The yard waited. I stood there with the two worlds staring at each other across the mud. The valley folk clumped silent at the gate, the 5 riders steaming in the cold, and me in the middle, an old ranch hand with a ledger in his coat, holding my breath along with everybody else. It took a while, longer than it needed to, for a man just fetching a child from a chair, and when the door finally groaned open again, I understood the why of that too, and it undid me. Cullen came out first, and behind him, holding onto 2 of his fingers with her good hand, just 2 fingers, that's all her small hand could manage, came the girl. He'd let her set the pace. He was moving at a crawl, this huge man taking the tiniest steps his long legs would allow, and she walked out into the cold morning beside him, wrapped in one of his own blankets that dragged in the mud behind her, her wrapped wrist held against her belly, her bare feet, I'd not found shoes to fit her, set down careful on the cold boards. She stopped at the top of the steps, and she looked out at the riders. I watched her find the old man. I watched her face when she found him. And it wasn't fear. I'd braced for fear. It was something more complicated than fear. Something that had grief in it and guilt in it and a child's terrible tiredness. The look of a little girl who has run as far as her legs will carry her and finds she has not run far enough. That the thing she was running from has followed her all the way down the mountain because the thing she was running from was inside her the whole time. The old man got down off his horse. He did it slow, mindful of the young men who tensed to cover him, and he waved them still. And he walked out into the middle of the yard, alone, an old man in the mud, and he stopped a good distance from the porch, far enough that the girl didn't have to feel him coming at her, and he said something. In Apache, low and gentle. I didn't have the words, but I knew the tune of it. It's the same in every tongue there is. It was I'm sorry. It was I didn't know how. It was please. The girl didn't answer. She held tighter to Cullen's 2 fingers. And the old man, this is the part I've never been able to tell without stopping. The old man looked up past the girl at Cullen, and something passed between those 2 men that had nothing to do with size or fear or anything the valley thought it knew. 2 men who had both, in their separate ways, failed to know how to hold a grieving child. One who was trying to learn, one who was too old and knew it. She chose your door, the old man said to Cullen, in English so the girl might understand it too, maybe, of all the doors. She did, Cullen said. The old man nodded slow, like a man setting down a weight. Then I think, he said, she has told us both something about where she feels safe. He looked at the child a long moment, and a man who wishes only to love a child does not get to choose whether he is worthy of her. The child chooses. She has chosen, twice now. He almost smiled, and it was a sad thing, that near smile. Once by leaving, once by holding your hand in front of her own people when she might have run to us. I looked at the girl's small hand wrapped around Cullen's 2 fingers. She hadn't let go. Through all of it, the writers, her uncle, the whole terrible weight of being wanted by 2 worlds at once, she had not let go. Now here's where it should have ended sweet, and here's where it didn't, because life doesn't run in the neat grooves we'd carve for it. The old man could have ridden away, could have left the child where she'd chosen to be and told himself it was mercy. Plenty would have. Grief makes a heavy thing to carry, and here was a man offering to carry it for you. But he didn't, and that's what made him a good man, and that's what made it hard. She is Chiricahua, he said. She is not a thing to be left like a stray because leaving is easier. She has people. A name, Nalia, though she has not answered to it since the fever took her mother. She has a grandmother who is old and going blind and asks for her every morning. She has a history that did not begin on your porch, big man, and will not end there. His voice was gentle, but it did not bend. You cannot keep her as one keeps a foundling. That is not kindness. That is only a different kind of taking. And I watched that land on Cullen. I watched the man understand that he was being asked to give up the one thing that had ever chosen him, not to a villain, not to some cruelty he could stand between her, but to the truth, which is the one thing a man can't put his big body in front of. Cullen was quiet for a long time. The girl held his fingers. The cold morning steamed. "What are you asking me?" Cullen said finally, low. "I am not asking you to lose her," the old man said. "I am too old and too tired to lie to you, and you are too plain a man to be lied to. I am asking you something harder." He gestured slow at the hills he'd come down from, and the valley all around, at the great cold distance between one world and another. "I am asking you to share her, to let her have her grandmother and her language and the graves of her mother and father, and to let her have this door too, when the running gets to be too much, to be a thing she comes back to. Not a wall she hides behind and never leaves." The old man looked him dead in the eye. "A wall keeps the world out, but a child cannot grow up inside a wall, however safe. She has to be let out into the weather sometime, even the hard weather, especially the hard weather. That is how they grow. A wall keeps the world out." I saw those words go into Cullen like a blade, because they were the exact words for the thing he'd made of himself over 19 years. The wall, the weather, the shadow that cleared the street. He'd built himself into a wall to survive a world that feared him. And now a wise old man was telling him gently that the very thing that had kept Cullen alive would, if he clung to it, slowly smother the child he loved. That he would have to become something other than a wall. That he would have to learn to be a door. Something that opens, something that lets go and trusts the world to bring her back. I don't know that I have ever in my life watched a harder choice said in front of a man. To love a thing so much you'd wall the whole world off to keep it, that's the easy love, the love that feels like strength. To love a thing so much you'd hand it back to the very world that frightens you, trusting it might return of its own free will, that's the other kind. The kind that looks from the outside like weakness. The kind that's the opposite of everything Cullen Rourke had ever been allowed to be. He knelt down, same as the first night, on one knee on his own porch in front of the girl Nalia, so his eyes came level with hers. And he spoke to her, low and slow in that green horse voice, and though he didn't have her words and she didn't have all of his, I don't think it mattered much. Some things get said under the words. "You come to me in the dark," he said, "and I'll not ever forget it, long as I live." He drew a breath that shook a little this enormous man. "But you got people that ache for you, a grandmother that asks after you every morning, and a mama and a daddy up in those hills that you got to be able to go and sit with when you need to. Things I can't give you. Things no man can give you but your own. He reached up slow and tucked a strand of her dark hair back from her face, and she let him. She let his huge hand near her face, and she didn't flinch, not anymore. So you're going to go back with your uncle, and you're going to be brave like you were brave coming here. The girl's face crumpled, the first crack in it since she'd come to us. Her grip tightened on his 2 fingers. "But you hear me now," Cullen said, and his voice broke clean in half on it, and he let it break. He didn't fight it, this man who'd never in 19 years let a soul see him bend. "This door don't ever shut to you. You hear? Not ever, day or night, storm or dry. You get the feeling like the world's too big and too cold and you can't carry it. You come here, you knock, and I'll open it. Every single time, long as I'm breathing, I will open this door. And there'll be a fire, and there'll be broth. And there'll be me." He pressed his forehead, gentle, to the top of her head. "You didn't run to a wall, little one," he said, so quiet I barely caught it. "You run to a door, and I aim to spend the rest of my days being one." Winter came back around before I heard her name again. That's the thing nobody tells you about the hard, right choices. They don't feel like triumphs. They feel like a door closing in an empty house, and then a long quiet, and then the slow business of learning to live inside a life with a hole in the middle of it. Nalia rode off with her uncle on a gray afternoon, wrapped in Cullen's blanket. He'd have taken his own coat off and given it if she'd have let him, perched in front of the old man on the paint horse, small and straight-backed, not crying. She didn't look back. I remember Cullen watching for that, watching for the look back that never came, and I remember thinking it near broke him worse than tears would have. But she didn't look back because she wasn't scared. That's what I told him after, and I believe it's true. A child looks back when she's being taken from safety. She rides straight-backed and doesn't look when she knows the safety's staying put, when she knows the door will be there. He'd built her something so solid she trusted it to hold without watching. Small comfort, but I gave it to him because it was what I had. The valley talked, of course, for a while, but the story they'd sharpened their knives on hadn't come true. The giant hadn't stolen a child, he'd sheltered one and given her back, and there's nothing a rumor hates worse than a plain fact standing in its road. It withered, slower than I'd have liked, but it withered. What surprised me was the ones who came after. The widow Halloran was first. Came up the road one evening about a month on, stiff as a fence post, and stood at the bottom of the porch steps holding a covered dish and not meeting Cullen's eye. Said her boy had told her what happened. Said she'd been wrong about some things. Set the dish down on the bottom step because she couldn't quite make herself hand it up, and left without another word. It was a peach cobbler. Cullen ate it slow, over 3 days, and I don't think it was the cobbler he was tasting. Then it was the blacksmith's family. Then a rancher from over the ridge whose name Cullen had never even known, come to shake his hand and not able to say why exactly, just that he'd heard and wanted to. 19 years of a whole valley crossing the street from a man, and it took one barefoot child in a storm to start them crossing back. Cullen bore it the way he bore everything. Quiet, a little bent at the shoulders, but I'll tell you what changed, and it was a small thing, and it was everything. He started saying good morning. Used to be, Cullen would come out at dawn and set to work and not make a sound till dinner. Now he'd catch me at the corral and say it, morning, Eli, rough and awkward, like a word he was still learning to hold. And he'd nod at folks on the road instead of looking through them. Little cracks in the wall, light getting in. He kept the fire laid. That's the part I have to tell you, because it's the part that says everything about the man. Every night all that long winter and into the spring, Cullen Rourke laid a fire in his hearth and set it ready, not lit. Just laid, kindling and split pine, 1 match's worth from blazing. Every single night. I asked him about it once early on, thinking maybe he'd just fallen into a habit and not noticed. He noticed. "Case she comes," he said, like it was the plainest thing in the world. "Cold night, storm, she oughtn't have to wait on a fire." And every morning he'd bank it back down cold, unused, and every evening he'd lay it fresh again. 300 and some nights. A fire for a child who was 9 miles and a whole world away, in case she needed it. In case the running came on her again in the dark and she remembered there was one door that would open. I put it in the ledger. I put a lot of things in the ledger that year, but that one I underlined. She didn't come in the winter, didn't come in the spring. And I watched Cullen start to make a kind of peace with the not coming. Not a happy peace, but a real one. He'd done the right thing and the right thing had cost him, and he was paying the cost the way an honest man pays a debt without complaint, a little more bent each month. He started to talk about her in the past tense, sometimes catching himself, and I understood he was doing the thing you do to survive a hole in your life. Filling it in, slow, a spadeful at a time, telling himself she was grown into her own world now, safe, and that was the whole of what he'd wanted, and a man doesn't get to want more than the thing he asked for. I let him believe it. It's what you do. Summer came on hot and dry. The kind of summer that cracks the ground and yellows the grass and makes the whole valley hold its breath for rain that won't come. We worked long days. Cullen laid the fire every night still, though it seemed near foolish now, a hearth stacked with pine in that killing heat, and I never said a word about it because a man's got a right to his own foolishness, especially the kind that's really hope-wearing foolishness for a coat. And then one evening in the deep of August, dry as a bone, not a cloud, a night so hot the dog wouldn't come inside, Rue started barking. The sharp one, the someone's here one. I was in my cabin counting nails. I'll not lie and say I knew right off. A year is a long time, and hope is a thing you learn to keep on a short leash so it can't drag you somewhere and leave you. I got up thinking it was a coyote, a drifter, a horse got loose. I pulled on my boots slow. Then I heard Cullen's door. That big oak groan. And it opened, and it stayed open into the hot dark the way it had stayed open into the storm a year before. And something in the exact way it stayed open put my heart clean up into my throat and had me out the door of my cabin before I'd got my second boot on right. I came around the corral in the dark. And there was Cullen on the porch in the yellow lamplight, down on one knee. I stopped dead. Because for a second, for one long swimming second, I was back in that storm. A year fell away like it was nothing, and I couldn't tell you what was memory and what was the thing in front of me. But it wasn't the storm. It was August, dry and still, and the shape in front of Cullen in the doorway wasn't the small barefoot thing that had come to us a year before. She'd grown. A year of growing. She stood taller now, past his shoulder even with him kneeling. Her hair was longer, brushed and braided proper, and her dress was whole and good, and her feet, I looked, some old habit, her feet had shoes. She was cared for. She was well. Whatever the last year had been for her up in those hills, it had not been the starving, hollow grief we'd pulled out of the rain. Her uncle had done right by her. The valley of her own people had held her. She was not running. That was the difference, and I saw it the same instant Cullen must have. The child who'd come the first time had come the way a hunted thing comes, fast and desperate, a body flung at the one door in the dark. This girl had come slow, in the daylight of a long ride by the look of the dust on her. She'd come the way you come to a place you choose to come to, not fleeing something, seeking something. She'd come back. Not because she had to. Because she wanted to. There was a horse behind her, ground-tied, and away off down the road in the last of the light I could make out a single rider waiting. The old uncle, I'd have bet the ranch, hanging back at a respectful distance, letting the child cross the last of the ground on her own 2 feet, the way Cullen himself had taught them all a person ought to be let to do. Letting her knock her own knock. Because she had knocked. I understood that now, working backward from Rue's bark and the open door. She hadn't just walked up. She'd climbed those steps and she'd knocked on that great oak door, a year older and a year braver, and she'd waited for the giant to open it. And he had. Every single time, long as I'm breathing, I will open this door. He'd kept the promise. 300 and some nights he'd kept it, laying a fire for a knock that didn't come. And here, at last, in the dry dark of August, the knock had come and the door had opened and the promise had come true. I didn't go up. This wasn't mine to be in the middle of. I stood back in the shadow by the corral, an old man with shaking hands, and I watched. Cullen was saying something to her. I couldn't hear it, but I watched her nod, and I watched her reach into a small pouch at her waist and take something out and hold it up to him in her open palm, some small thing. I never did learn what, a stone or a bead or a bit of carved bone, some gift, some token, a child's whole heart made into a thing you can hold. And I watched Cullen Rourke take it from her palm with 2 fingers, the same 2 fingers her small hand had gripped a year before, so careful, like it was made of glass and mourning. And then she said a word. Just one. I heard this one, carried clear across the still hot yard, because she said it plain and she said it on purpose, having saved it up maybe the whole long year for exactly this. She said his name. Cullen. The first word I ever heard her speak. The girl who hadn't answered to her own name since the fever took her mother, who hadn't said a single word the whole night we'd warmed her by the fire. She'd carried her first spoken word 9 miles and a year, and she'd spent it here, on this porch, on this man, saying the name of the door that opened. And Cullen, the giant, the wall, the shadow that cleared the street, the man the whole valley had sworn up and down for 19 years would never, could never, be a father to anything. Cullen made a sound I'd never heard a man make, and he gathered that child up off the porch boards into his 2 huge arms, gentle as gathering water, and he stood, rising up to his full towering height with her held against his chest, and she let him. She let him lift her clean off the ground. She wrapped her arms around as much of his neck as they'd reach, and she pressed her face into his shoulder, and this time she was not shaking, and this time neither was he. He turned slow, holding her, and through the open door I could see it. The fire, laid ready in the hearth like every night for a year, one match from blazing. He carried her toward it, to warm her. Though it was August, though the night was hot as a forge, he carried that child into the fire he'd kept ready 300 nights for her, because some warmth has got nothing to do with the weather, and a promise kept is its own kind of fire, and a man will light a hearth in the dead of August if it means a child knows, all the way down, that she was waited for. The old uncle, far off down the road, turned his paint horse and rode slow back up toward the hills. Alone. He didn't look back either, but I don't think it was grief that set his back so straight in the saddle as he went. I think it was the other thing. I think it was a wise old man riding home light, having carried a heavy thing a long way and found, at the end of the road, the right place to set it down. I stood in the dark by the corral a long while after the door had shut them both inside, warm, with the firelight coming yellow through the window, and Rue settled on the porch with her chin on her paws. Then I took out my ledger. My hands weren't shaking. I don't rightly know why. Maybe some nights are steady enough to hold a man up on their own. I found the page from a year before, the date, and under it the one line I'd written in the mud and the storm, the only prayer I know how to say. Lord, let the big man be right about himself, just this once. And under it, in the dry, still dark of that August night, with the firelight warm in the window and a giant cowboy holding a child who'd chosen him twice, I wrote the last thing I ever had need to write about Cullen Rourke. I wrote, he was. The fire's still going, far as I know. I'm an old man now and my own miles are near run, and I don't get up to the Rourke place the way I used to. But I hear things. I hear there's a girl up there, near grown, who rides better than any hand Cullen's ever hired. I hear she's got her uncle's people and her grandmother's tongue and a giant's name for a father, and that she moves between the hills and the ranch like the 2 worlds were never so far apart as everybody swore. I hear he still lays the fire some nights, out of habit now, out of love. in case somebody's out there in the cold and needs to know a door will open. And I think about the whole valley all those years warning their children away from the big man's shadow. He's not for you. He's the hard one, the one you cross the street from. They were wrong. He was the one you ran to. Some doors, you don't know what's behind them till the worst night of your life, when you're barefoot in the mud with nowhere left, and you knock.